Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Ask Leah. This week I'm talking about authenticity. I was asked a question from someone whose organisation has recently redone its values. And one of the values they came up with was authenticity. And this person reached out to say, look, we weren't involved in them coming up with these values and they've put them out there. And at the moment, they're kind of like pretty words on a page with not a whole lot of detail about what it actually looks like in practice. What does authenticity mean to you? So there's really two parts to my response here. The first, just to touch on very quickly, if you are doing values work with your team or organization, firstly, I get that depending on the size of your organization, it can't always be a ground up approach to setting values, but if it can be, if you can engage your people in coming up with the values collectively, they are always so much more powerful. The second thing on when you do values work is don't just leave it as pretty words on a page. In these conversations, whether you're involving your people in coming up with the values or you're rolling them out to the organisation, you need to be able to discuss and clarify, what does living this value look like in practice? What does it look like in a meeting when we're giving feedback? What does and doesn't it mean? You've got to make it real, or other people just see it as a pretty word and everyone interprets it differently. When it comes to authenticity itself, it is a really interesting word. It's one I actually just spoke about with a team recently. And the reason a word like authentic or authenticity needs to be explored more is because it is an example of one of those words that, if not really clarified, can be weaponized. Now, authenticity sounds great. It is being genuine. It is being true to yourself, not inauthentic and fake. It is being able to show up as the truest and best version of you so that you don't have to hide who you are, that you're being honest and really genuine in what you do. All sounds wonderful. However, I did giggle recently when I was listening to the wonderful Keeping It Real with Jac and Ral podcast with Phillips and Gabrielle Dolan, where they were talking about authenticity, and they said, don't try to be someone else unless who you are is a dickhead, then try to be someone else. And I laughed at the time because it's spot on. You know, we can use authenticity as a cop-out and an excuse for really poor behavior if we don't get clear on what it looks like as a value. You can weaponize it and say, well, I can be really blunt, or I can hurt that person with feedback that is actually quite cruel and not empathetic at all, because that's how I feel and that's me being authentically myself. This is where we can get into trouble. I mean, showing up as yourself is great, but Jac and Ral are right. If who you show up as hurts other people, has no consideration for those you're working with, and is a bit of a prick, then rather than focus on being authentic, you probably need to work on your own personal development and showing up a bit better for those people around you. So again, authenticity, not a bad word, but it needs to be explored. What does being authentic look like in a conflict? What does being authentic look like under pressure? What does authentic look like in a meeting when you've got really different personality styles or communication styles? This is the level of conversation we've got to get to if we want our values to stick. If you have a communication, leadership, self-management, tricky people stuff question you'd like answered, send it through and I will do my best to answer it for you next week. Cheers.